All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Albuja. Today, well, first, I am an ecology student, and my home department is landscape architecture. So I'm going to take you today a little bit out of your comfort zone. I'm going to take you to nature, but I'm going to explain everything I can. Okay. So this is part of my chapter. I'm going to give you some insights on my final dissertation. So the title is Japanese Primary Control and Active Restoration Strategy for Climate Resilient Forest. So first, to get the ball rolling, what is biodiversity, right? So there's a variety of animal, plants, and fungi, and microorganisms that inhabit and exoplanet, right? So all of them interact with each other, and there is a lot of recycling, and we can call it this like the web of life, right? So we depend on biodiversity for everything in our life. We depend for food, all the food we're eating today because of biodiversity. Thanks to biodiversity, we have clean water to drink, to shower, to clean. Thanks to biodiversity, we have medicine because from plants. Science is capable of synthesizing those components that kill us and oxygen, etc. Right? So for this, nature has to be included in sustainable goals because we have to find this perfect balance, right, between nature and humans, and why we're all here today. So kind of like I work on the goal 14 and 15, which is talking more about restoration of ecosystems. But more specifically, if we go to the Montreal Agreement, this is basically a full framework that targets different parts to protect biodiversity in the world. And my project is between target number 2, which is specifically saying that we have to restore the 30% of degraded land for 2030, and target number 6, which says that we have to stop the introduction of invasive species, but also to stop the impact. And with all of this, what is an invasive species and why it threatens biodiversity? Well, invasive species are considered the second most important environmental problem in the world. It threatens countries' economy. For example, if there's an insect that is introduced from another continent and it starts eating all the crops for an agricultural field, we have there a direct impact on an economy of a farmer, for example. But what if we have a grass in a wetland that starts soaking all the water and dominating the ecosystem? What's going to happen with that clean water that is filtered for the local communities there, for the people living there? So in that sense, this community is going to have to pay more to bring water from other places or to clean that water somehow by, like, I don't know, engineering or construction. So in that way, that's going to impact our budget, right? That's going to impact how people live and how people pay for their living. So climate change exacerbates the impact of invasive species as same as the trade laws. But right now, we live in a world, everybody's moving all the time. So as people is moving, also plants are moving, also animals are moving, also microorganisms are moving. And we have to take care of it. So just a broad scope, there are 6,500 non-native species that have escaped cultivation. I'm going to talk about this in the United States, and they are established. That is not equal to be invasive. They are just established there. They are out there. Now, what it means to be an invasive species, and there has been like a whole evolution of what we understand as this. What I'm going to show today is the newest concept. Okay, so it's a species, whether it's an animal, a plant, a microorganism, that it's capable of dominating the ecosystem, and it's going to reshape very fast that system or the web of life that I talked. So what it means that there are all these connections between living forms are going to get disrupted, right? There are many things that are going to start not working anymore. And this also leads to the loss of the native species that are living there. So we're losing biodiversity when we have an infestation happen. And this is clear when I said that not every non-native species can become an invader, because invasion, the concept right now, we're talking about a species that can change an ecosystem, and that can also happen with a native. For example, let's suppose I own a forest. I'm a rich person, right? So I own a forest and I start cutting all the trees. And then it happens that there's a grass growing there that takes advantage of the new life because I'm taking all the trees. And with time, this forest becomes a grassland or a prairie, right? And in this case, this native is an invasive species, right? So the concept relies on how we lose those ecosystem services and how the systems are changing. So what is all related this with design? How we connect this with design? Where first, invasive species are an important component of restoration ecology, specifically here in the global north. And restoration is a type of design. We are designing how we bring back native species. So what is ecological restoration? Many of you are familiar with the concept of restoration, that is in terms of nature, is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. It requires a lot of research. We have to work a lot on long-term data sets because we have to see how nature reacts. It requires thorough planning because it needs to be very carefully done if we don't want to mess it up. It requires ecological design and it's very applied. We do a lot of management and we also dig into the policies so they can keep us alive. What we want to achieve, generally speaking, a more desirable ecosystem state, something that benefits us as humans, but something that also lets that ecosystem to keep existing, right? Because it has an intrinsic value. This is just an example. This is a stream restoration project that happened in the Water Department of Philadelphia. And they're doing a really good job here of like making the different areas where the native plants can exist again in this stream. But also we have to consider there's people around, right? So meanwhile we're working on the ecology of this restoration project, we have to take care of the trash removal, we have to take care of tourists, etc. Right? So this is a good example of how we design for nature. All right. So the forest in the United States. My work focuses more on the eastern deciduous forest, right? And right now, the 40% of the United States forests are at risk of large-scale collapse. So huge thing. And the main drivers are management of biofuels, unmanaged recreation, fragmentation, global warming, and invasive species. This one over here, you're not familiar, it's part of the display. So my work focuses on global warming and when we're talking about the eastern deciduous forest, there is a particular plant, it's a big layer, and it's very, when I talk with a forester, this is the first thing that comes out. It's a shrub, it's a thorny shrub, and it's called Japanese barberry. This is the scientific name, barberry sunberry. This is how it looks like, and I know it's pretty, it's really pretty. And it has, yes, these yellow roots here, you see here. We also have how Japanese barberry is like existing beautifully in a sidewalk. We have the berries, and this is a manual that when it became popular, they were teaching you how to better grow your barber. And what happened is that it got introduced in the 1869 for hedging, for farming, but also for gardening, and it escaped cultivation. And right now, it's naturalized in 31 United States and 5 Canadian provinces. When I say naturalized, I mean that it's out there, it's existing, it has its own population going on. But when we're talking about infestation, it's more on the northeast. It has this early leafing capacity, and it's really good at producing food and nitrogen. So how does Japanese barberry change the forest? Because so far, okay, it's invasive, but what is actually doing in the forest? So here's a photo of a guy that's really happy because he just took out the Japanese barberry roots. And if you see the roots are huge, they expand. and it's a really good competitor. So what it does, literature show us, is capable of changing the pH of soils and nitrification rates. And this is more on part of the human dimension about hosting abundance of ticks. We all know what ticks do. So this is a study made by Jeffrey Ward in 2013. He showed that a forest infested with Japanese barberry can host up to 120 ticks per acre versus a forest that has no Japanese barberry can host 10 ticks per acre. So yes, it increases a lot. It reduces native biodiversity because it's really good at competing. So it's just like taking over all the places. It's good at carbon storage, and of course, it's gonna impact on the water infiltration since it's changing biodiversity. So, how it looks like. Maybe the next time you take a walk in the forest, you're gonna remember me. So this is how a healthy forest looks like. I know we're not foresty people here, but you know we have more trees there. But down in the understory, we can see a variety, different high altitudes of shrubs, and there's maybe like some gaps there. So there is still a space to walk around, and there are forbs and flowers. Versus if this forest was infested and looking in the spring, it's gonna look like this. So yes, the trees in the upper part are still sleeping, right? Because early it's the spring. But what happens is all the understory is coming covered with Japanese. Okay, all these shrubs that we see here, all these plants, all the Japanese barberry, and it just gets worse with time. Just a lot. So with all of this in mind, I know I just put the evil character here. What we can do about this, right? So our question, the first question is, how can we prevent Japanese barberry from repopulating eastern deciduous forests after removing the shrub? Why? Because there's a lot of research that has been done on how to remove the plant. We know a lot about its invasive ecology, but there is not a lot of research on how we actually solve it. For this, we set up a field experiment. I'm not going to talk a lot about this today because the data is still not done, the experiment is still running. But I'm going to talk more about my indoor experiment, and we asked some questions here. Okay, we're capable of controlling the shrub from coming back, but what happens after that? Okay, one of the main questions was, are Japanese barberry seeds able to germinate and survive under warmer temperatures? And this is particularly important for climate change scenario, right? And the second one, can native plant outperform, which means compete and win, the early growth of Japanese barberry? Those were the two questions. And for this, we set it up a greenhouse experiment, where you control more the variables like temperature, humidity, etc. The study place, maybe some of you are familiar with this, but Master Gap is a property from Penn State. It was under lease for agricultural purposes for many years. Then it came back to Penn State. It went to the Zuckerman family. They made a lot of studios, and they designated different areas for different purposes. Right now, I'm focused on this area of Master Gap. This particular forest, we call it an early successional forest because it's coming back from agricultural uses, but it also connects with this part, which is Rock State Forest. So this is just how the forest looks like. We can see there next to it the ag field, and this is how Master Gap looks like. All the trees are very young, and all the plants that you see in the understory is Japanese barberry. And they put me to do a plant survey because we wanted to know how much barberry we have in this property. So it was a lot of effort, 2 years of summer work, being around ticks and Japanese barberry, having fun there. But the data is very solid. So what we see here, this is a box plot chart, is showing all the shrub species that we find in Japanese barberry. And this particular one, the green one, Japanese barberry, so as you see, it's very high compared with the other ones. What we find is if you is from 10 shrub species that you find in Mastercard, 8 of them are going to be Japanese barberry. So yeah, it's an infestation, it's a clear dominance. So the field experiment, this is still going on. It started in this spring, it's gonna end next year fall. All these cages that you see here, we call them deer cages. So it's to protect our native species. We control Japanese barberry there, and we plant our native species. But of course, there are deers that eat natives, and they love it. So it was like, okay, we have to protect them. So we build these cages. Each of these are the plots. This is what I already mentioned. We applied to the best of our skills, the control methods, and we planted native sequences. Which plants we use? So we use this plant, that's a native plant that's called a hard aster. It's known to be like very aggressive at growing. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna find a big one. I have to bring another big one, right? A spice bush. This is, so you're going to find one kind of different strata. You're going to find from herbaceous, grasses. You're going to find shrubs. This is spice bush. And finally, we also use a red oak. So stay tuned for the results of the experiment. And for the indoor experiment, this is how an indoor experiment looks like. This is a grow chamber here in the AC building. This is when we're like just controlling temperature and things. So what we did here, we collect the soils from these infested areas. We clean it a little bit for animals, but we use it as it was. So we bring the soil, but we also bring the seeds from Japanese barberry. I collected them in October last year, and I also had the seeds from the hard aster. These seeds, one portion of the seeds was from Pennsylvania, and the other seeds were from Kentucky. Why? If you want to test if the seeds from a native plant from the south can grow here. This is called assisted migration for the future of the forest. So this is just like more detail. We can talk about this later. So also a reminder here, I bring soil from the forest. So there are seeds that from other plants that still relate there. This is called a seed bank. And we were going to have these plants. So we also want to see like, okay, what's going to happen if we have other plants, not only the one that we were testing. So for the results, I have the first question here. Who thinks the Japanese barberry perform better in warmer temperatures? Raise your hand. Nice. Very, very definitive. All right. So, and you're right. So in spring, we have, this is a graph that is showing Japanese barberry height and the treatment. Treatment means that if it's growing with an aster from Pennsylvania, aster from Kentucky, or it's just growing with Japanese barberry alone. And then we have here the plant height of Japanese barberry. So the blue boxes that we see there is the future temperatures in spring, and we overall see those boxes upper. So yes, it grows more in spring under future climate change scenario. And if we have early summer, with the same situation, we have same for when it's growing with both asters. And here, when it's just growing Japanese barberry alone, we see a little bit lower line here. And we interpret this as a heat stress. So heat stress is when a plant is out of this comfort zone and it starts to behave different, right? It starts to die or it starts losing leaves. In this case, the height was lower. But overall, yes, it performed better due to climate change. Another question. So how many of you think that aster performed or was able to compete with Japanese barberry? Thoughts? Okay, 1, 2, all right. Unfortunately, the answer is again no. I just want you to focus. So when we run our model, the linear mixed model, the only variable that came in to impact the growth of Japanese barberry was actually temperature. So which was expected. We know that with more temperature, plants grow faster. I just want you to focus on these dashed lines because these dashed lines are how many barberries we have in the different seasons and what we expected from previous literature we have reported a germination of 12.8. Germination means from a set of, like, I don't know, 10 seeds, how many of them germinate? Which was expected, and everybody said, like, okay, seeds are really not good at outside. It does better at reproducing through the roots and through the branches. But what we reported in this test was 21.3%, which is like much higher than we expected. So at least the barberries that live here, close to University Park, are doing really good. And this is also shown here, time one, when we registered the species developments. You can see that after, for example, they are not even out. They are zero, close to zero. And all the Japanese barberries are already with high abundances on time one. And what happens in future temperatures? We saw a response in combination of treatments, which means temperature plus the after seeds 2, which are the ones from the Kentucky species. So this was interesting because I already talked about this plant stress that we saw in the future. However, when it's competing with a plant like with the aster from Kentucky in time 2 is when all the asters start to germinate because they germinate later than Japanese barberry. What happens, I just want you to focus on this green line and blue line. So here they are separated, one up, one down. However, we can see a little flip here. The blue one goes upper and the green one goes down, which means that there's a switch. The blue one, which is the barberry that's going with the aster of Kentucky, is getting higher and higher temperatures. So what does this mean? That even when it's stressed and it's experiencing a lot of competition, it outperforms the other species. So it's not all bad news. Okay, hang on, yeah. So we have, again, this seed bank. This is native species that we're growing. And we perform another model and we got this result. So when we're talking about predicting the initial growth of Japanese barberry, we have important the season. Yes, we know that in summer they grow more. Temperature for sure, I have already mentioned. But this was interesting because we found that two species that impact on the growth of Japanese barberry turned out to be two natives that were on the seed bank. One is called American birdweed and the other one is called pokeweed. Both of these are grasses that kind of like have this feature of grow very tall and grow very fast. So we were like, okay, this is interesting. This is how the model performed. And how is the relationship? I'm just going to talk about this one, which is the blue one, which is pokeweed. So what happened, what you see in the x-axis here is the height of Japanese barberry, and here is the height of the species that I mentioned. So what happened with pokeweed is that it kept increasing in height, but Japanese barberry was not increasing a lot. It was kind of growing steadily, so that's why we see that it's all under this line. So, and this is also a feature. This is kind of different here because the dimensions are different, but we also see here an incline in which burnweed keeps growing, this red line keeps growing, but at some point Japanese barberry stops growing. The line starts flattening. So this was good news for us. Some of the conclusions. So invasive plant species threaten world ecosystems and health and agriculture for sure. Germination and early growth Japanese barberry seeds from feral populations from close to our campus, increases with competition and higher temperatures. Yes, however, future experiments should test the species identified here or with similar growth characteristics because it looks like they perform good, and this is really important for restoration practices. I just want to finish with this. This is a translation of a song that I really like. This is a band that called like sings in behalf of ecosystems. So this is a forest. So just imagine that the forest is talking to you, and the lyric says, "Let me breathe. I'm still alive. Give me your hand because saving me is saving all of us." Thank you so much.